if you read the Bitcoin Act put forward by Senator Lummis and Congressman Begich, they specify a 20-year minimum holding period for Bitcoin. And the President of the United States has said, never sell your Bitcoin.
Imagine a world where money isn't controlled by governments, where inflation can't erode your savings, and where financial freedom is built into the very fabric of the system. That's exactly what Bitcoin offers, and no one explains it better than Michael Saylor. Saylor, a visionary entrepreneur with an engineering mindset, doesn't just see Bitcoin as an asset. He sees it as the solution to a broken financial system. With his deep background in mechanical engineering, cybernetics, and feedback systems, he breaks Bitcoin down like a well-designed machine, one built for resilience, efficiency, and fairness. Traditional money is like an outdated engine prone to failure, inefficiency, and constant government manipulation. But Bitcoin? It's like the perfect feedback system, engineered to be decentralized, incorruptible, and mathematically sound. It's digital energy, stored wealth, and financial freedom all rolled into one. In today's video, Michael Saylor will break down Bitcoin in a way you've never heard before, connecting its revolutionary nature to the principles of engineering, money, and human progress. By the end, you'll not only understand Bitcoin, but you'll see why it's the most important financial innovation of our time. But before we dive in, do me a quick favor. Smash that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear this, and if you haven't already, hit subscribe for the best Bitcoin and crypto updates. Your support helps us grow and spread financial freedom. Now, let's jump in.
When the spot Bitcoin ETFs were approved in January of 2024, that opened the entire floodgate, and now 3,300 institutions own this, and we went from nothing to $150 billion. You can't undo that. You know, a future president or head of the SEC could never say, in 4 years, there'll be $500 billion in these things. They can't say, well, I just decided that Bitcoin isn't a commodity anymore. It's just too much in one direction. And once banks start to bank Bitcoin, when Bitcoin spreads through the banking system and there's $1 trillion of digital capital in the banking system, it won't just be in the US. It's a virus. And so the virus spreads. And in this case, that means you're going to have hundreds of banks, then thousands of banks, then trillions of dollars that are held by 1 billion people. Okay, so a new president gets elected and maybe they don't like Bitcoin. You can't take $1 trillion out of this system. So it's kind of like a new president saying, I just, don't think that we should have the flu. Well, I mean, or I don't think bunny rabbits should, be able to romp across the continent of Australia. You're not going to put, the genie back in the bottle. These things are viral, exothermal. It's a fire in cyberspace, and it spreads very rapidly. And so when I finally discovered Bitcoin, I think I appreciated it as an engineered system. Right, it's full of really, really powerful, elegant engineering structures that made it stable. Right, something like the difficulty adjustment is a first-order negative feedback loop, a servo mechanism. It's the same principle you need to make a steam engine work. By the way, it's the same principle that pops up in all sorts of machines. It's a principle in electrical engineering, and it's a principle in all kind of nonlinear dynamic simulations. You need a first order feedback loop. But then the other thing I realized is Bitcoin is thermodynamically sound money, and it's a thermodynamically sound network. The idea of thermodynamically sound is very important to an aeronautical engineer, because in order to create airplanes, you normally do all the modeling and engineering based upon assumptions of adiabatic systems. And an adiabatic system is a sealed closed system, and in a sealed closed system where energy doesn't leave or enter the system, you can solve all the problems. And so they say assume an adiabatic system, and it turns out that if the system is not adiabatic, if it's not sound and sealed, you can't solve any problem. And so The real genius of Satoshi was to create a thermodynamically sound monetary system. And if I give you the example, I give you a bathtub, there's a leak in it, or I give you a ship, there's a leak in it, or if I give you a plane and there's a hole in the fuselage, you know that, like, that's always the theme of the horror movies, the Titanic, or the window got blown out in the airplane, explosive decompression. All of the catastrophes are because you don't have an adiabatic system or thermodynamically sound system. The economic catastrophe, that's the analogy here, is hyperinflation, or the collapse of a currency. And so all of my engineering background at MIT was how to design systems that are sound, that work, a ship that flies, and a ship that doesn't, a plane that flies, a ship that doesn't sink, right? You see them in my house when you see the ships that don't sink, the planes that fly, right? Satoshi was a truly genius engineer, but you could also say Satoshi was simply a competent engineer. Satoshi designed a monetary system using semiconductors, public-private key cryptography, and the internet that was possible for the first time sometime around 2009. It was impossible during the time period of Hayek or von Mises, when all the Austrian economists wrote about this. They didn't have the technology to design a thermodynamically sound monetary system. So they used gold, which was an imperfect network and an imperfect asset. It's kind of like Da Vinci and Michelangelo, or maybe Newton, and Leibniz. They're genius scientists, and they want to design an airship. But if you don't have an internal combustion engine and petroleum, you can't make an airplane. The Wright brothers had petroleum and a motor, an internal combustion engine, and they could create an airplane. Maybe not so theoretically genius, but practically they made us fly. So Satoshi took all of the math, all of the engineering, all of the monetary theory that came in the hundreds of years or thousands of years before him or her, and created perfect money. And so I think my background, drove me to go to MIT. My education was as an engineer and as a systems engineer. By the way, there's another important point. Aeronautical engineers are probably the greatest of all systems engineers, because to create an airplane, you have to master civil engineering, mechanical engineering, metallurgy. You have to master electrical engineering, stability. And if you get anything wrong, the plane crashes and burns. And you can't, for example, you have to build an airplane with aluminum, even though the best material is steel, because steel is so heavy, the plane crashes. You can never fly a steel plane. And so you have to make a compromise. And the compromise is, I have a plane that flies, but it's not as strong as steel. When you're a civil engineer, you use steel, but the building doesn't fly. So if you apply that to money and Bitcoin was an engineered system with compromises. Like, well, why can't you just clear the transactions every 5 seconds? Well, because it's not stable, right? If you want it to be stable, then you have to clear the transactions every 10 minutes. And so, well, why can't you just have infinite block space? Well, because then it's not stable over time and the security collapses. Well, Satoshi understood that if you wanted it to be stable in time and space, there was a limit to what you could achieve. Just like, well, why can't I just have a 100-story building that flies across the ocean? Well, a civil engineer wouldn't know why you can't, but an aeronautical engineer would be able to explain exactly why you can't fly a 100-story building across the ocean, right? And so my background, I think, caused me to look at Bitcoin and appreciate the beauty of the engineering. And whereas someone that doesn't have an engineering background might say, well, I'm just going to hack together something which is smarter, faster, quicker, and easier, and you end up with all the other altcoin experiments. But what they don't do is they don't appreciate the thermodynamic, physical, mathematical, and systems limitations over time and space that a really good system engineer would understand. And so I think that all brought me to where I am today. And it caused me to look at this thing and say, oh my, Satoshi created the perfect monetary network, for the world. And it's like someone gives you steel, you want to build Manhattan. Someone gives you aluminum, you want to build an Air Force. And so I see Bitcoin and I say, oh, perfect money. What am I going to build? And, so far we've taken our company, with $1 billion market cap and built it into an $80 billion company just by building off of what I view as crypto steel.
And that's a wrap on today's video. I hope it gave you a fresh perspective on Bitcoin and its revolutionary potential. Michael Saylor's analogy of Bitcoin as engineered money is mind-blowing. Precision, resilience, and decentralization all built into a perfect financial system. But what do you think? Is Bitcoin truly the answer to fixing a 5,000-year-old broken money system? Did Satoshi's innovation create the ultimate financial freedom machine? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And while you're at it, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for the latest Bitcoin and crypto updates. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.